So this is what my face looks like when I'm very happy. And this is what my face looks like when I'm really mad. Now, fortunately, I know that some of that is coming from my cultural background. My ancestors came from Denmark, and some of the cultural values of that culture have trickled down to me, where stoicism is prided, and where low expressions of emotional affect is sort of a source of pride. But what if I didn't know that? What could happen is that I could end up pathologizing anyone who's coming from a culture where affective expression is encouraged or even celebrated. And if you think that doesn't happen, just look at some of the theories. This has trickled into some of the ways that we approach mental health. What gets rewarded, what gets punished, what gets attention, and what doesn't. And so it's important to be very mindful of who we are and how that affects what we do and what we don't do in our clinical work. We have an interesting profession in that we are the tools of our profession. So who we are matters. And it's important to be conscious of the things that inform what we do and what we don't do. So, for example, I work a lot with binational couples, couples where they are from two different national contexts, and that's not the only factor. They may differ in their first language. They may differ in their economic status. They may differ in their race. They may differ in their religion. A lot of different intersecting variables. And so, what I've noticed over the years is that sometimes they come into a relationship with a set of expectations, but they are just expectations about this is the way that the world is, and so they don't always communicate those to their partners. I think of those as covert cultural contracts. They're kind of holding their partner to the expectation of something that they've never told them that they expect because they don't know to say it. So imagine maybe I have an Afro-Colombian partner who has married someone who's Caucasian from the United States. And then they come into therapy with a therapist. And that therapist is bringing into the therapy room their own cultural background, their own ways that they've been influenced by race, by their gender, by so many different variables. My goal as a supervisor of a person working in that situation would be threefold. I would, one, my goal clinically would be to help the couple to be able to make their covert contracts overt and to be able to become first conscious of the ways that their race and place has influenced how they are in relationship, and to be able to communicate that to their partner so that the couple can navigate that and negotiate and figure out some way to sort of integrate the different backgrounds that they're coming from. My goal with the supervisee would be for them to also be conscious because of the ways that their race and place influences what they're doing and what they're not doing clinically. And I think doing that also helps them to identify some things that might be blind spots for them. And the third goal would be to develop intervention strategies that are congruent and helpful from the cultural backgrounds from the people that we are working with. A lot of that is informed by Gerald Wing Su's multicultural competencies, and which has the basic structure of a therapist becoming conscious of their own cultural background, being very attentive and paying attention to the cultural backgrounds of the people that we're working with, and then developing intervention strategies that are congruent with that. I'm also informed by liberation psychology. This is an approach to therapy that comes out of El Salvador, which I think of as a systems approach, but it's focused more on the macro, how the larger context influences people and their mental health. And then I also think a lot about in terms of cultural humility. I started talking about how I could take my stoicism from my cultural background and think that that is the way to be in the world, and that can come out in my clinical work. Cultural humility, I think, is just really realizing that our ways of being are only one of many ways of being in the world. Some of the ways that I might actually do that in therapy is I might say, like, if I was an Afro-Colombian therapist, what questions might I think to ask that I'm not thinking to ask? And then just sort of putting things out where we can talk about the differences in our race, in our culture, in our backgrounds so that they don't become problems in therapy. I think my supervision style, like my clinical work, tends to be more strength-based in its orientation. So if I'm working with someone, particularly someone from a diverse background, which most of the supervisees that I've worked with are, for example, I'm currently supervising students in Shanghai with their clinical work, and I've worked with a lot of international students over the years, and I've worked with a lot of therapists here in Mexico as well. But strength based. So something I mean by that, I would want them to elevate their expertise. I'd want them to recognize what they're doing well. I'd want them to figure out like the unique cultural strengths that they might be bringing to the clinical room. I would want them to focus on sort of the times that they've had resilience in their life and to see if there might be ways to utilize that in their clinical work. If I ask someone to point out their flaws or their weaknesses, usually they can rattle those off pretty fast. When I ask them their strengths and what they're doing well, sometimes it's really hard for them to identify that. So having them to have the ability to do that is an important part of my supervision practice. And then I also think a lot in terms of transferable skills. I've worked with a lot of therapists over the years who are, it's their second career. They're coming back later in life. And I remember one therapist, she had been a school bus driver. And it was amazing to me to see how many transferable skills there were from, handling all these children on a school bus and all the responsibilities that she held in that position, how there were transferable that those skills could be transferred to her clinical work. And I find that true for most people. There's things that they do great in areas of their lives, and they can also use those in their clinical practice. Um, Sometimes I have to, I was thinking I have to adapt my feedback based on different cultural backgrounds. Some cultures are more comfortable with directness. Some are less so. Some people prefer things in written form. Some people prefer them through dialogue. So I try to figure out like what works best for a supervisee and adapt my feedback based on that. I have my goals. I have some real clear goals. If they're in the United States, one of my goals is to prepare them to be licensed. I feel like I have a responsibility from the moment I start working with them until they're licensed. So I have some goals like that. But I also want to co-create goals with them. I want to know a little bit about what their career paths, their hopes are, and what they want to do in their lives, what the populations they want to work with, and then I want to help them prepare for that. Like for example, maybe some people are going to go back to their home country, and so I might need to adapt a little bit about what we do so that they are prepared to do that and to be successful. I want to, just like I with a patient, I would culturally adapt my intervention strategies. I will culturally adapt my supervision strategies. And then I just what I think is most important is that there's a lot of communication. So we have our regular supervision times, but I also want to do occasional just check-ins. I want to ask them about how a particular session went, what went well, what didn't go well, what they would do different if they could have a redo, and I want to help them to sort of self-reflect about why particular things were difficult and why other things weren't. For a decade or so, I would take students to Cambodia. We were helping set up a family therapy program at the Royal University of Phnom Penh. But I would take sometimes supervisees with me. And I remember one year we went to the killing fields where teeth and bones still come up out of the dirt after a rain. We were also working with children who were HIV positive and ran a camp with them. And we also made a visit to a community where people had been attacked with acid, and so their faces and bodies had been disfigured by acid attacks. And we went, we visited these different sites, and we after the program, we went back home, and one of my supervisees came up and talked to me and said that she was having nightmares. And it really made me think and wonder. Like a part of me felt like my goal is to protect the innocence of of my supervisee. But then on the other hand, if I know that there's huge communities of Cambodians that live in the United States whose lives were touched by the Pol Pot regime and from some of the atrocities that occurred there. And so when does innocence become a clinical and a clinical barrier, a barrier to being successful in our work. And so, I struggle with that a little bit, and it's not just in cases like what I just shared. Sometimes when I'm teaching human sexuality, maybe I will talk about sexual abuse statistics, and I might talk about the prevalence of it, and I might talk about things that are really can be very, very painful to hear. I might also talk about treating people who are sexual offenders, and for some people that can be very triggering. Something I know, just based on the basic stats and different research, is that many people who go into the field have experienced sexual abuse themselves. So how do I not re-traumatize a supervisee, but also help them to be able to be prepared to listen to those kinds of stories without becoming emotionally deregulated? That's the balance that I'm trying to strike. So part of it is just sort of acknowledging and talking about how I have a dual responsibility. I have a responsibility to the supervisee, and I also have a responsibility to the clients that they will work with. And I'm trying to find a way to make sure that I'm being helpful to both. One, I might just acknowledge and validate the both of their realities, and that part of our work is confronting really harsh, distressing, and painful things, and being witnesses to that, and sort of acknowledging that's a really natural human response to be impacted by those. And then I'm going to integrate sort of trauma-informed supervision practices, and that means ensuring, that when possible, I let them know that we're going to be talking about something difficult, but that they're going to be exposed to something difficult, but also helping them to increase their resiliency. And so one of the ways that I might do that is trying to do it kind of like a scaffolding approach. Like my goal is not to traumatize anyone, but to help them to sort of have exposure and to learn skill sets to manage their emotions, and how to stay present in order to be the most helpful to the patients that they're going to be working at, and helping them identify the ways that they've had resilience in other areas of their lives, and then really just fostering ongoing dialogue and trying to be supportive. An overarching framework that really informs me comes from Jung, who talked about wounded healers. His belief, and I'm summarizing it, but his belief was that it's not in spite of our wounds, but it's almost, but it's because of them that we can be really powerful healers. Um, if we do the work to sort of address the wounds that we've had, because then we've gone before, we've gone through painful things, we've learned skills in order to handle those painful things, and we can utilize those in our clinical work. There's so much happening in our field, so many evolutions that are occurring. Um, the thing I've been a part of is sort of trying to internationalize mental health services. We are only at the very beginning. 95% of research is still coming from the United States, and there's all these healing and change practices from other places. So I want to be part of that, and so I will be teaching some of those things in courses and in supervision, and drawing from those resources that come from other spaces on the planet. The other thing I think we can't ignore is the technological changes that are happening. And so I'm working hard to try to keep up with everything, but it's going to change everything. So I would want to address that in my courses and in my supervision. And then the sort of the counterbalance to that, I think the more that technology takes over the world, the more we're going to need to connect to the natural world. And so I'm very interested in the work that's being done around eco-family therapy. And so I want to incorporate into both my classes and into my teaching things that help us reconnect with the planet that we live on. It's challenging to strike the balance right, what people might find interesting as opposed to weird. But well, one thing that came to my mind is I haven't had a car in 20 years, and I'm always in a constant step competition with friends of mine. And what that mostly involves is us smack talking about how many steps we got that day, and then sending pictures of trees. So in my phone, half the pictures are of my kid, my 5-year-old, and then half of my pictures are of trees. So the other thing is, yeah, I'm a solo parent. I have a 5-year-old named Atticus, and I'm writing a book for a non-academic audience called Letters to My Son's Future Therapist, and I'm having a lot of fun writing that. Okay. Hello, my name is Dr. Jason Platt, and um, you can't hit me on the head with it. Oh, okay.
Just that hits me on the head.
Okay. Hello, my name is Dr. Jason Platt, and I'm excited. You got to hold it right behind me so that I look professional.